Hello, good morning students. Today we are going to see the pilot plant scale-up of tablet dosage form. As we have discussed in the lecture about the stages for preparation of tablet and the key parameters that need to control in the pilot plant of tablet. Now we are going ahead in the stages of production of tablet. It includes material handling, dry blending, granulation, drying, reduction of particle size, and required granulation technique, dry blending, direct compression, and then slugging. Right. So one by one we are going to see the scale up strategy used in the material handling. Right. In the lab scale, we are simply scooping the material by hand or some intermediate um, apparatus, but on large scale or intermediate scale, the scaling of the handling of the material is often necessary, right? So if a system is used to transfer material of more than one products, then step must be taken to prevent cross contamination. There is a problem of cross contamination if we have not handled the material properly. So any material must be delivered the accurate amount of ingredient to the destination, means in the required in the given apparatus. It must deliver the accurate amount of material. Okay. And the type of system depends on the characteristics of the material. More sophisticated methods of handling material, such as vacuum loading system, you can use for proper filling, and for liquid you can use metering pumps, and for solid you can use screw fed system, which will be conveying the material via screw fed technique. Okay. There is no or minimum loss of material is there if we are going to carry out by proper technique. Now second is dry blending. Right. What is dry blending? As we have discussed that dry blending process use a binary cohesive material, matlab which contains two different size of the material, right? And they may be finer also, right? So because of the fine material, they adhere on the coarse surface, right? So fine materials, as shown in the figure, the fine materials adhere on the coarse material, and it leads to the agglomeration of the fines and coarse, right? And it produces electric charge by contact and cohesion of the particle, right? So as shown in the figure, when you're going to mix coarse with the fine, then fines will accumulate on the surface of the coarse, and it leads to the interaction, electric charge interactions, and collision between the particles. Now when the powder is need to be used for encapsulation, then it is required to be granulated. Okay. Why? Because of the good particle size or good drug distribution. If the powder is granulated, then it has good distribution as well as good flow property, so it will give good content of the uniformity. And inadequate blending at this stage, it results in batch variation, right? So you can say there is a weight variation and non-content of the uniformity, right? So inadequate blending, if they are not properly blended, then it leads to the inadequate or high or low in the potency, that is called as non-uniformity of the content. Okay. Now the steps should be taken to ensure all the ingredients must be free from lumps and agglomerates. Very important, right? In the dry blending, if there is a lump formation, then again there is a poor flow property and again non-uniformity of content, right? So for this reason, to avoid the lump, screening or milling of the ingredients is required, right? So it makes the process more reliable and more reproducible. Okay, so this is basic technique of dry blending. Okay, now in the dry blending technique, what are the scale up consideration? See, these are the three steps required to be considered during scale up. First is time of blending. Okay, up to how much time you are going to blend your material, right? And the blender loading, matlab the quantity of material to be filled in the blender, it is called as blender loading, right? And third is size of the blender, what is the quantity, what is the size of container we use for blending. These are the 3 points of scale up consideration. Okay, now problems of improper blending. Now, in case of why there is improper, if there is improper blending takes place, then what are the disadvantage of improper blending? Is if the blends are not uniform, then again the problem of content uniformity, right? There is no uniformity of the content is observed, right? And next, if improper blending is there, then there should be a flow problem throughout the equipment, right? Throughout the equipment there is a problem of the flow. And third is non reproducible compression, right? Your compression cycle is non reproducible, you will not get a reproducible result of your tablet preparation, right? So these are called as problems of improper blending. That's why it requires proper scale up of the blending steps. Now, equipment used for blending is, first is V blender, double cone blender, ribbon blender, slant cone. Depending upon the different shapes, these blenders are named and classified. Bin blender, right? And this orbital shaker, screw blender, vertical and horizontal mixtures, right? Slant cone blender, bin blender, and these are the different figures given, right? After blending or mixing of the powder, the next steps comes is granulation, right? What is granulation? As we know that it is a process where small particles are gathered into large, right? So small particles are together into a larger one, and permanent masses in which the original particles are still be identified, right? So the small grain particle matters together and forms a large size granules. The most common reason to justify granulating are to impart good flow property to the material. Because of converting our powder into granules, the flow property can be improved. To increase the apparent density of the powder, what happens? The density of the material is increased if the material is very fluffy, and if you convert into granules, then its density increases. And to change the particle size distribution, right? If you are having a completely fine size material, then by converting into granules you can change its particle size distribution, right? And also you can say that by granulation uniform dispersion of the active ingredient is there, right? This is called as introduction to granulation and its requirement, why we are going for granulation. Okay, now our main point is scale up. Now which type of scale up is required in the granulation technique? Two processes are considered similar if they are geometrically, kinetically similar and kinematically similar, right? So what the 3 indicates, systems are called geometrically similar when we can say two systems are geometrically similar if they have same ratio of characteristics linear dimension, કોઈ પણ dimensionના ratio સરખા છે, then it's called as geometrically, right? 2 plus 2 4 geometrically similar. The two geometrically similar events are called kinetically similar if they have same ratio of velocity between corresponding system point, right? The motion, the rate of movement relatively same ratio of velocity, right? And the two kinematically similar systems have dynamically similar when they have forces between corresponding points. Okay, now the type of granulation. Wet methods which utilize some form of liquid, right? In type of granulation we have the wet granulation as well as dry granulation. Okay, so when we are going to use wet granulation, then it use liquid to bind. Okay, and when we go for dry granulation, then it doesn't require liquid. Okay, now the equipment used is sigma blend mixture, we have studied in our junior classes. Planetary mixture for semi solid, and dry method which do granulation and minimize the technical risk are roller compactor, shear mill, and fluidized granulation. Now most widely used is wet granulation. It is employed low shear mixture, or it is a blender which normally used for dry blending, right? So this ribbon mixture, when we require low shear, then we are going to use a technique which is called as ribbon mixture. Okay, which use dry blending. There are a number of products which currently manufactured using this low shear techniques, right? It is efficient and reproducible. A method के which है efficient and reproducible. Every time you will get the same results. Okay. Now the binders used in the wet granulations are, what is the role of binders? That they promote size enlargement, right? So by addition of binder, it leads to the agglomeration of the material and it promotes the size enlargement to produce granules, and thus it improves flowability of the blend during the manufacturing process. Okay, now what are the binders used? Are natural, synthetic, and semi-synthetic and synthetic. Now natural polymers are, we are going to generally use is starch and pre-gelatinized starch. Okay, synthetic polymers includes PVP, polyvinyl pyrrolidone, they are synthetic, methyl cellulose, and HPMC, right? So these are called as synthetic polymers, can have the binding tendency. Now new natural and synthetic binders are Chiagum, Leucophallus seed gum, Anacardium acidula gum, Gillian gum, a combination of deuterium gum and V-gum. And some new synthetic binders are chitosan and maltodextrin, right? See the figure of wet granulation. Drug in a grind karo, mix karo in the blend, and addition of liquid in the wet granulation, it forms agglomerates, it forms pellets. Again go for drying which is screening karo sievamathi, and then add lubricants, and then compression, and then tablet is ready. Okay, then it is a multifunctional process which used the many performable functions to convert your granules into tablet, right? Like blending, wet granulation, drying, sizing, lubrication, all this takes place in a single equipment. Okay, so these are the figures of some machineries which are going to use in the tablet preparation: sigma blade, planetary mixture, rotary shear, roller mill. Okay, now in case of dry granulation, as we have discussed earlier, that in the dry granulation we are going to use which equipment? Then it is called as chalconator, and it is also called as roller compactor. It is commonly used in the pharmaceutical industry. There are a number of drug substances which are moisture sensitive and cannot be directly compressed. They have to be sent into this roller compactor, right? So if we are going to go for granulation, then they are sensitive to moisture, and if we directly compress it, that is not compressible. So we have to use this roller compactor to convert into loose compacts, which gives you granular size and which can be ready for compression. Now fluidized bed granulation. Now, in case of scaling, this is one of the most widely used instrument for granulation, in which granules are placed in a single equipment like bucket, in which binder solution is sprayed on the fluidized powder bed. Your powder bed is fluidized with the help of high pressure air, and you are going to spray binding solution. The material processed by fluid bed granulation are finer and free flowing and homogeneous. Okay, so good amount of or good quality of materials are obtained. Okay, the system involves the heating of air and then directly in the it through material to be processed. Let the same air exist through the voids of the products. Okay, now in case of fluidized bed granulator, what are the key parameters which we have to consider is inlet temperature at which your air enters the material. It is very important, otherwise it may leads to the degradation due to temperature, and sometimes it may leads to the degradation due to high moisture of the air. Then atomization air pressure means at which pressure your air is entering, right? So it will be helpful for fluidization. If the pressure is less, then it will not able to fluidize, right? Air volume, the spray rate of the liquid is very critical, otherwise it leads to the agglomeration, but it's not easy, right? Nozzle position and number of spray heads. How much spray heads are there? How much number of holes are there from which liquid is coming out, right? And product and exhaust air temperature. Filter porosity. Okay, so these are all the key parameters need to be controlled during scale up. Now, in case of scale up consideration, what required is air temperature and air volume. Two parameters need to control: air temperature and air volume. Why? Because proper air temperature is required to achieve desired product temperature, right? So you have to maintain temperature in such a way that it will not remain wet and it will not even degrade, right? So you are going to have to control the temperature of the air and adjust this temperature with process air volume. Okay, and second is process air volume in અંદર produce a fluidization pattern, right? If the volume is not sufficient, then we cannot produce fluidized volume of the material and deliver heat to the product, and change should be at the same time in magnitude. Okay, so this is called as scale up consideration. Now, application of granulation. Now in the application, why we go for granulation? To increase the uniformity of drug distribution, the density of the material, to enhance the flow rate and rate uniformity, to facilitate material or volumetric dispensing, and to reduce the dust. Now, varying drying temperature for granulation. In the granulation, we have studied two methods: wet granulation and dry granulation. So in case of wet granulation, the drying technique can be either FBD, you can go for vacuum drying, you can go for microwave drying, you can go for spray drying, exogenous periodization, pelletization can be also used, right? But in case of dry granulation, the drying technique will be dry compaction. Okay, why? Because it is good in terms of work, less power is required, less handling of material since they are in closed system, and reduce the danger of exposure of individual student, and you can control it. Okay, now is the drying. After granulation, it required to be dried. Now the most common method used for drying is FBD. We are going to use the FBD for drying, right? Either it use steam or electricity. Now the granulation bed is to be deep or too dense. Okay, drying process will be inefficient if soluble dyes are involved. Okay, that's and during drying it leads to the migration of the dye, okay, on the surface. Okay, that's why it is very critical to control temperature of the drying air to minimize migration of the color. Okay, and sometimes the drying time at specified temperature and airflow rate must be established, right, so that you can minimize overloading of the material. Okay, so in case of drying, what are the scale up consideration? So airflow, air temperature, and the depth of the tray. Up to how much height of the depth the material you have loaded. If too much depth is there, then it cannot dry it properly. Okay, so depth is also important in case of drying. Okay, suppose if you are going to use tray dryer, then airflow, air temperature, depth of the tray, then monitoring the process by use of moisture and temperature probe, પછી drying time at that specified airflow, all these are critical to be considered. And last is fluidized bed dryer. Suppose if you are not going to use tray dryer and if you have selected fluidized bed, then what are the critical parameters required for scaling up optimum load? Your load in this basket should be optimum. Airflow rate, inlet air temperature, and humidity of the incoming air is considered. Okay, so here we are going to complete our one of this session.